Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell. Thank you, as always, for joining us for what's going to be a loud, intense, raucous atmosphere of today's episode, because we're talking about atmospheres, the 12th man, crowd noise, all that good stuff. What makes for a good atmosphere? Where are the loudest stadiums? Much, much more. Here with me to break it all down is a man who will be drumming throughout the entirety of this episode to establish the vibe. It's Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. Yeah, I'll give you a warning before I break into the Viking clap. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just surprise you with it.
And then, do I have to match the cadence as well? Are we going to slowly speed up as we go? Man, that was a really cool thing that Iceland did, and then a terrible thing that everybody copied.
Well, I think Seattle Sounders fans would tell you that they came up with that first. Whether I believe them on that or not, I am unsure.
It's just that, like, Iceland, where they spoke like Old Norse the longest, where you think they might still be Vikings, the whole like thing, like, it felt very like, this is what Vikings did. This is a proper Viking army coming to invade.
Hey, I've never been to Seattle, but from what I've heard, could be Vikings there as well.
Yeah. You got a point there. They're usually in Minnesota. Sometimes they come to Seattle, though. You got a point. You got a point, Graham. We're going to talk about atmosphere, as I said. Let's start off by talking about the concept of the 12th man. Now, this is a mythical ghost-like figure that sometimes appears in Disney movies to give a team a boost they need. Is that correct, Graham?
I think that is correct.
Angels in the outfield style, if you will.
Yeah, it's Scooby-Doo style. They unmask the 12th man at the end of the game. And they've caused havoc. Yeah.
You've done your best to yes and an impossible task. Thank you for that, Graham. What is the 12th man? Is that a thing that you all use in Scotland, in England, in Europe?
Is it something that people say? Probably not. Like, I don't think anyone is going into a football stadium being like, "Oh, we're going to be the 12th man today."
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's a concept. I mean, do people in the US say that? I don't think they do it, but it's a concept that is like familiar to people over here.
Yeah, it's usually, I feel like, said on the broadcast when the crowd is super loud, usually in American football, usually in college football at that. You will hear the broadcaster say, "Oh, the 12th man in effect," or like getting that 12th man experience or something like that. And it dates back to, from my research, Texas A&M. In 1922, I believe they've tried to copyright the concept and term of the 12th man, which feels bold by them. But it was the idea, I think, that they were going to call in a player from the stands because they had so many injuries and the player was up for it. They didn't end up playing, but it was also the crowd's response to that led to the idea that, like, the crowd itself can be a 12th player when you already have the 11 on the field, and that added intensity and atmosphere that can be created can lead to a momentum shift and can help push a team towards a win and push the other team towards a loss.
Yeah, it seems to have been popularised by a lot of the American colleges, but newspapers of American colleges. I found, this is purely from Wikipedia, so I didn't exactly research that deeply, but the University of Minnesota's magazine apparently used the term 12th man in September 1900, so Texas A&M might have some competition on their hands for that trademark. The quote was, it referred to, quote, the mysterious influence of the 12th man on the team after a game where the crowd was particularly loud, and I'm presuming they won or got some sort of positive result. But
Graham, do you know who tried to countersue them? Who tried to for equal usage? The Seattle Seahawks. Seattle are just all over the place with their challenging who came up with what and when.
Yeah, they came up with all kinds of supporter culture. They come up with a fight and win chant as well. Do they want to trademark that one? In terms of the soccer origins, it's kind of impossible to know. I think it's probably just a case of they looked to American sport at some time and teams just adopted it. 106 teams around the world have retired the number 12 jersey in honour of their fans. So Bayern Munich have done this, Lazio, Flamengo, Rangers, Hibernian, wasn't aware of that, but then went and looked and so they might want to tell someone why they never had a number 12, those teams. But anyway, Portsmouth as well in England, so countless clubs around the world have done that. So that just points to what I was saying. Yeah, it's a concept that is pretty universal across sport, not just in soccer.
So if 12th man, the concept of a 12th man is universal in sport, Graham, is atmosphere universal? Do we all think the same thing when we think of atmosphere? I'm not sure if we do, but I'm also not sure if we don't.
Yeah, so I think most people would think of atmosphere. The best gauge is like noise, isn't it? Like crowd noise is most of the time what people are talking about when they talk about atmosphere. So that could be pre-match songs like "You'll Never Walk Alone," or it could be chants that fans sing throughout the game, and that is where there is a cultural difference between chanting you get in English soccer, or well, I was going to say European soccer, but actually English, British soccer, I think is quite distinct from maybe chanting you would get in places like South America or certain places in like Mediterranean Europe. And I think English fans in general are quite reactive, so they would react more to what is happening on the pitch. And they do have chants, obviously, but they will maybe like start up. There's a clear start and an end, I think, with like British chanting. And then they'll like maybe move on to the next one. They tend to be about players or history, things that have happened in the past or whatever. Whereas a lot of other cultures, I think they use chanting as like this constant drumbeat that's there for the whole match. I think of that as like South American chanting or like in Europe, like Mediterranean Europe, and which personally I think can be really impressive. I remember when the PSG fans went to Anfield last season, and it was a everyone thinks they're a gangster moment for the Liverpool supporters because it was the PSG fans making all the noise during that game. At the same time, I think after a while it can become like a bit repetitive and actually isn't that intimidating because you can kind of just like zone it out because it's like it's just a constant noise. So I have mixed thoughts on what I prefer. Obviously I would take that over like a quiet Premier League stadium, but I think when people talk about, you know, Anfield, for example, being this incredible atmosphere, they are talking about how when Liverpool are attacking, there is a reaction from the crowd that maybe in other cultures you won't get to the same extent. And that can be really powerful in terms of what you see on the pitch.
Yeah. So if we're talking about like different types of chanting, different noise that can lead to different atmospheres, that is one of my favorite moments. And it happens the world over, but I do think of it as being a somewhat common thing in the Premier League. Is like, let's say there's been a long clearance, like goalkeeper takes a goal kick long, and like the center back like chests it to the right back, and the right back immediately hits a volley out of pressure to the left back on the other side of the pitch. Like, it's not that impressive of a moment, but it is really like technically precise, and it's a good way to evade pressure. Or if two players will like wall pass their way out of pressure, even if it doesn't lead to an attack, it's above a golf clap, it's below a roar, but there's that like applause of appreciation of the moment that you will get in soccer games. That is one of my favorite moments, where there's just applauding a very minor moment that like the technical precision thereof is to be rewarded with like nodding applause, like, oh, well done, well done, well done. That sort of thing can be itself a great sign of an atmosphere, because it means everyone is sort of locked in and watching with enough focus that little moments of passing out of pressure are to be rewarded and appreciated.
Yeah.
And I think that shows you how dialed in a crowd can be or not be, as the situation might merit.
Yeah, and anecdotally, the best experience I've had of what you're talking about there, Taylor, was the Spain-Scotland game I went to at Hampden a few years ago, which, by the way, feels like a lifetime ago then, when it felt like we could take on anyone and beat them. By the way, the last team to beat Spain, and they've won the Euros and the Nations League. Oh, they did, actually, Portugal beat them in penalties, so congratulations, Roberto Martinez, you're now as good as Scotland. That game, though, I remember towards the end, we were 2-0 up, but because we're Scotland, it still felt like it was on a knife edge in like the last few minutes. And I remember like a tension in Hampden. It had been raucous up until that moment, but it was like a tension. It was quite quiet in that moment as Spain had the ball. And then Kieran Tierney just like absolutely smashes Danny Carvajal, wins the ball cleanly out for a throw-in. And he does that thing of like whipping the crowd up, and like 52,000 Scotland fans in that moment give it like the big reactive roar. And I think that is... I mean, you get that in American soccer as well, but that's because I think American soccer has borrowed some kind of like cultural elements from all over. But I do think of that as like a British thing. Like, I think if you go to South America or even in places in Europe, like it's much more of that constant drumbeat where you maybe don't get that like that the quiet chest beating reaction from the crowd reacting to things on the pitch.
It's the positive and the negative of the inclusion of drums, I think, which is definitely a more South American thing. Most MLS teams seem to have adopted the drums, and sometimes that can then feel like a cover for the lack of chanting and the lack of noise. If you have drums going, it's always going to add an oomph to whatever the chant might be, whereas otherwise you might only get some of the supporters singing along. Or if you have like a traveling away section of 40 people, you're not going to be quite as raucous unless you have those drums. But I think you do then lose some of that quietness. You'll hear it in broadcasts when there's a really big moment. The broadcasters will just pull back and not say anything because they're letting the game speak for itself. They're letting the atmosphere speak for itself. And drums can accentuate that, but I do think you're right. They can also sort of kind of blend things out, so there's just always a noise there. Maybe you're not listening to the intensity of that noise in the crowd experience as much.
Yeah, and I think it can be really impressive. I'm not trying to say that there's certainly... I've not been to a game in South America, but I'd love to go to, the Bombonera or the Monumental and experience that different football culture. But there definitely is a clash in how those two things are communicated, as there is with... and I think we're now starting to see more of kind of a globalization of this sort of thing, but banners and tifos as well, I think, are included in what would be considered like atmosphere of a match. And I very much think South America and Mediterranean Europe has led the way on that sort of thing, and we're seeing it more and more in like British soccer. MLS as well, I actually think is kind of world leading in that sense with a lot of the tifos and
the flags. And you gotta have flags in the background. I remember when the FIFA video game started bringing in flags into the background because the crowd otherwise just had the robotic arm up, arm down, arm up, arm down. Like there's not much to it. You add in like flags in the background and tifos and banners and the like, and it just creates such more intense experience because there's just clearly so much other stuff happening, so much more intensity to the match day experience. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is also a balance there because I think sometimes, clubs will... I think Chelsea are quite bad for this. They will put out flags for a big game and then that feels quite plastic because I think of tifos in particular, I think of as a reflection of supporter culture. And so if it comes from the club itself as part of some sort of commercial strategy. Yeah. I remember Arsenal for their Champions League game against PSG. I think that was the club that did that big tifo. That was just it got mocked on social media. It was the what was it? The gun, the cannon for Arsenal, and there was nothing else to it. So sometimes even the tifos, if they're not from the actual fans themselves, they're not created. If they're not a reflection of anything cultural, then they can feel a bit plastic and hollow.
There's a weird line that I can't say there's like an easy way to navigate, but I think of do you know what terrible towels are? Do you know that reference, Graham? So it was a Steelers thing. It remains a Steelers thing, I think, and I think they were given to fans at every single game or at certain games where they would give you a little yellow a bigger than a washcloth, but a dish towel basically. And then they would usually be waved around in circles. But if you have a whole stadium doing that, usually in a big moment when you want to stop or you want to cheer for your team to get the touchdown or whatever, if you need to show that everyone is together and pulling in unison for their team, that's a good way to do it. And I remember getting tons of shots of that. And rally caps is the same thing. By contrast, I remember the Heat when they had the LeBron, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade era. Yeah, they would do whiteouts where they would give everybody in attendance white Heat T-shirts, and then the whole crowd was wearing white, or blackouts, and everybody was wearing black. And it's meant, again, to show everybody's there, everybody's kind of united in their support for the team. But that feels like such a low-hanging, put on a shirt and just kind of sit there, and it looks like everyone's... It's just, there's that difference where you're still... One is giving the fans something that they're just waving around. One is giving the fans something that they put on and then sit with. But... there can be an embracing of that, or there can be you are doing the bare minimum effort to make it seem like everybody's excited about this. That creates a pretty sizable difference between the two.
It sounds like, and look, this is the first time I've heard of, was it the terrible towels? It sounds like there was a purpose that they were utilised throughout the game, right? There was, whereas the Chelsea flags, it's wave this when the teams are walking out onto the pitch, and that'll do. That'll be that's the atmosphere that we've got for this game. So I think that it's how it's manifested, right? How it's communicated is there can be a difference there.
And I think that also probably relates to overall identity, because the Steelers, their name is the Steelers. They're in Pittsburgh. They've always been a hard-hitting defensive team that is going to bring the intensity, and the crowd reflects that. So I think if you have, even if it is waving a towel around your head, but you've got a bunch of screaming, raucous lunatics waving a flag for a team that is always about hitting as hard as they possibly can, there's just a next level intensity to that. So those are the moments that I think that type of experience can stand out and can make a difference. I think by contrast, there are plenty of times, to your point, that it can feel a little inauthentic. It can feel a little sterile almost. And like, this is not meant to be a shot at DC United supporters, but I was at a game with Red Bull supporters this season, and like DC didn't have Benteke in the lineup, and even if they did, I don't think it would have made a difference. But they mustered so little attacking threat. They did so little throughout the game. There is still an onus on supporters to kind of keep the energy going, keep the intensity going, because once you lose your key supporters and once the diehard supporters have gone quiet, things are bad. Very, very bad. But when things aren't good on the pitch and when there's no goals and no shots and it just feels like, it's going to be a 2-0 grinded out loss, I do think the chanting can reflect that. And I usually point to how often they revert to Esta Noche or Vamos, whatever you want to call it. But it's the one that you hear all the time, the one that's like Vamos, Vamos United, esta noche tenemos que ganar, like over and over and over again. And it just is sort of like, yeah, you're singing and there's drums playing, and that can be really great when you're like up for it and it truly feels like tonight we're going to win. When it's the 65th minute and you're down 2-0 and it's the 40th time you've sung that song, it starts to feel less authentic and more like you feel like you have to be doing something. So you're just kind of singing the same song over and over and over again.
I thought you were saying DC United fans sing like songs that communicate how bad a time they're having, which is something Scotland fans do. We sing, I want to go home, I want to go home, this is the worst trip I've ever been on.
That's amazing. Dude, that's another one. I'm sure they exist the world over, but I don't speak languages the world over. Like, English, Scottish grounds are so good for some of those, like the we lose every week, we lose every week, you're nothing special, we lose every week. Like those sort of moments of like self-mockery and criticism, but it's just like there's a cleverness to it that I think can elevate an otherwise poor performance. Let's cheer like we scored a goal. That's another great one where then the crowd just starts to cheer raucously even though they didn't score a goal.
Well, have you seen that? Surely you've seen this meme. I can't even remember where it's from. I'm sure it's a German team. Their fans all got the arrows. Their team had gone like 10 games without a goal, and they like followed the ball around.
See, so great. There's ways to have that like that enthusiasm and that spirit, even if the team is bad, by kind of pointing fun at how bad things are. When it's just like, now we're going to sing the same songs even though we haven't won in 10 games and haven't scored a goal in 6 games, it doesn't quite convey that same level of energy. Graham, are there other examples that you think of as being maybe less authentic, if not outright fake?
So I will give Arsenal a lot of credit for how they've improved the atmosphere at the Emirates over the last few seasons, because it was, not so long ago, it was considered like one of the sleepiest atmospheres in the Premier League, and they did things like they created a singing section in the stadium and they moved some of the more vocal sections of the fan base together. At the same time, and this is where I'm going to upset our Arsenal fans here, I think North London Forever is absolutely unbearable. So for people who don't know, North London Forever is this song, I think for the last 2 seasons, they have played this song before the game and the fans kind of sing it, and look, they're trying to make it their sort of You'll Never Walk Alone equivalent. But the reason You'll Never Walk Alone works is because it's established like a connection over time that makes that song so meaningful with the community, with the fans. And North London Forever, as far as I'm aware, was like commissioned by Arsenal to be a pre-match song. I just find it really cheesy and it's really plastic to me. But Arsenal fans seem to really like it. They all kind of sing in unison before the game. But I won't pull my punches. It makes my skin crawl at how like plastic it seems to be. Sorry, Arsenal fans.
How do you feel about borrowing from other like supporters' traditions? So, like one that comes to mind for me is the Poznan celebration when everybody turns around, like puts like arms around shoulders and jumps up and down facing away from the goal. That comes from Lech Poznan, right? Lech Poznan.
Yeah.
And then City played them. The supporters liked it, so then they started doing it. Yeah.
That's I've got no issue with that, because that's how like culture works. Is like the cultural exchanges, not just in soccer but in all sorts of creative art forms. That's how that works. What I don't like is when clubs just like magic that up out of nowhere. So Ryan's not on this show. I'm going to fire some shots at Charlotte FC here, who apparently, I noticed recently, the Poznan is part of their tradition. Unless there is some sort of connection there that I'm unaware of, and I will retract my disdain for Charlotte FC's tradition that's definitely not a tradition. Yeah, there needs to be some connection, something that communicates something about your club. Otherwise, it's just marketing, and I think that's what the Charlotte doing the Poznan is, frankly.
In terms of like best atmosphere, not necessarily that we've experienced, Graham, like what are the ones that most readily come to mind for either intensity of the experience or volume of the experience?
Yes, I'm going to start here with some clubs that are close to home, to me anyway, that are renowned for having great atmosphere. So Anfield on a European night, I think, takes some beating. I will say that Anfield can be a bit of a library. The one time that I've been to Anfield, it was just a run-of-the-mill Premier League game, and it like wasn't like bouncing or anything. I think that's pretty common across the Premier League, but it is pretty legendary when, like Liverpool, I think of that Liverpool, the semi-final in the Champions League when they're 3-0 down to Barcelona from the first leg and they bring it back to, they win that second leg 4-0. That's the Divock Origi goal and the Trent Alexander-Arnold quick corner kick. Legendary game. I think Anfield that night was possibly a factor in Liverpool winning that game, so it does have that in it. I think St James's Park is, I think it's the most consistently excellent atmosphere in the Premier League, largely because of the way that stadium is built. It's so steep around the two big stands at the corner, so you create this like wall of a stadium if you look up from pitch level. And I have done the tour at St James's Park, and I've been down on that level, and just it's ridiculous when you look up to the top of that stand. Also, the fact that the stadium is right in the centre of the city, I think also makes it feel like the atmosphere builds within the city itself before you even get into the stadium. Fans are in pubs around the stadium, and then they like just congregate, they just continue into the stadium, so that is a factor as well. It would be remiss of me not to mention Celtic Park, which, like Anfield, has this reputation of being incredible on a European night, and I've been there on a European night many times, and it is incredible. Heading over to Germany, Dortmund, they're renowned for having a great home atmosphere with the yellow wall, which is this huge stand behind the goal that is one of the most influential things in modern stadium design. You see clubs around the world trying to replicate the yellow wall. You see like LAFC in their stadium design trying to have like a single stand, safe standing area behind the goal. Tottenham have a similar thing. Everton have a similar thing with their new stadium. But I think Dortmund is still the original and best. In Italy, I think Napoli are known for having a great atmosphere, especially last season as they won the Scudetto. In Spain, I would put forward Real Betis as the best atmosphere in La Liga, although I've yet to experience it myself at the Villamarín. It's on my bucket list. I will go one day. And then in South America, I mean, you could take your pick of great atmospheres, like the Bombonera, which is obviously where Boca Juniors play, is legendary. The Monumental as well, which is River Plate. Honestly, you could look at countless South American clubs, Rosario Central, Nacional in Uruguay, Flamengo in Brazil, all incredible atmospheres, or so I've heard. I've not experienced them myself, unfortunately. And then heading to the US, I honestly think some of the best fan culture in the world you can find in the US. So places like Portland, LAFC, Cincinnati, Columbus. Obviously there is a balance between some of that feeling a little bit fake and a little bit artificial due to the fact that these clubs are newer than a lot of like their global counterparts. But I think a lot of what we're seeing now from MLS clubs is genuinely authentic, where supporter groups have real influence on what that supporter culture is like at games. And I would certainly put forward some MLS teams and even further down the pyramid as great atmospheres.
Portland is one that looms large in my mind, though I've never been to that stadium. A buddy of mine is a Timbers Army supporter, even though he now lives on the East Coast, and he goes back periodically just for games and talks about how it feels like going home, going back to family, seeing the same familiar faces, drinking in the supporters bars beforehand, and it just feels like you are going back to a community regardless of how long you've been away. And I think that is always going to feel particularly authentic, especially to American supporters. I would add a few more. I think anytime the U.S. goes on the road, there's always going to be a pretty strong atmosphere when they're playing, but especially in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, certainly, all end up feeling very inhospitable, and that atmosphere always feels very intense. Sometimes that's because the locker room is directly underneath the most diehard supporters. Sometimes it's the atmosphere and the stadium conditions. I think it was Saprissa where the U.S. has never won and maybe only drawn once in all of their times in Costa Rica. And then Estadio Azteca in Mexico City is another very good example of an insane atmosphere that I think can overawe most opponents. I think in terms of intensity and viewing experience, La Bombonera in Argentina, like the way you have, it's the barbed wire really that does a lot and the really high fences, but then also with every goal, that kind of rush forward, that crush that happens, that always seems like it would be terrifying to experience. But there is that intensity, there is that fervor that I think comes through on a broadcast that can truly make a difference. And then one that I have experienced firsthand is Turk Telekom Arena, which I believe I'm correct in saying is the loudest on record. I think it was like 130 decibels measured. I think that had the Guinness. Yes, and the Turkish national team. It is crazy loud in there. It is not the loudest I've ever experienced, but Turkish stadiums in general, I think it was Beşiktaş when Leipzig were playing there. That was the one where Timo Werner had to be subbed out because it had like messed with his equilibrium because it was so loud. So you will get just the volume and the intensity of the supporters can create an atmosphere. The flares and the tifos and the like can certainly create an atmosphere in Eastern Europe, especially the kind of organized usage of flares can create a sense that like outsiders maybe aren't very welcome and that the away team should buckle up for an unpleasant experience. So you can get all different types of experiences, all of which can be very useful in generating momentum and belief.
Is that what Timo Werner is using to explain the last few years of his career?
It's always been too loud. He has headphones set too loud, and so he's still trying to calibrate accordingly. Graham, for you, what are some of the most intense ones you've experienced personally?
So I think Celtic is the best atmosphere that Scottish football has to offer, although Hearts is good as well for a more kind of like intimate atmosphere because of how close the stands are to the pitch at Tynecastle. I also think Scotland national team games would be quite an experience for a lot of people to have for a lot of people who haven't been to one. It would be even better if we didn't play in a big toilet bowl of a stadium where you're miles away from the pitch. But even working with what we've got in Hampden Park, it is, I think, still one of the best atmospheres around. I mentioned them already. Newcastle United it's the best big stadium I've been to in the UK because of that steepness, because of the location in the city centre. I'm going to make a point of visiting Everton's new stadium soon. As I said a few times on this show, got a bit of a soft spot for Everton. I went down to Liverpool a couple of months ago and their new stadium looks incredible. I believe one of the stands behind the goal is the steepest by law that a stadium stand can be in the UK. I think it's like 35 degrees is the legal limit, and it's like 34.99. So I'm looking forward to going to that stadium. Internationally, I've been to Mestalla, which is obviously where Valencia plays. In terms of steepness, like wow, that's on another level, man. Mestalla, to the extent that I was up in the nosebleeds for this game. Actually felt quite unsafe, like going down the steps of that stadium. But it was a great atmosphere, and the loudest fans are right behind the goals. Another great atmosphere that I've been in before they chased me out of their country, the atmosphere in Bosnia and Sarajevo for the USA-Bosnia game, which I went to was like 12 years ago. Was pretty incredible and unlike anything that I'd ever experienced up until that point. And then in the US, Portland, I've mentioned them already. You've mentioned them, Taylor. That's the best atmosphere that I've experienced in the US and Canada. I've been to games in Toronto, Orlando, New York, LA, and Portland was by far and away the best atmosphere in the US. I like how it's like a mix of European and South American cultures. It feels like they borrowed stuff from all over. They have that organic. Obviously, the Timbers Army goes back decades, so you can't really accuse them of being like artificial or plastic. Yeah, I just loved watching a game at Providence Park.
For me, from a more domestic perspective, it was DC United at RFK Stadium because that would have been the early days, obviously, of DC United. Up until not too long ago, they were playing at a decrepit RFK. But it was the seats that could be pulled out but then pushed back depending on the event. But they were always pulled out for DC United games. But because of that, they weren't the most permanent of things. So as soon as you got everybody bouncing, that whole thing was bouncing and moving. And so you'd get a whole stand that was kind of moving and had a kind of rhythm unto itself. But you also had, because of the connections to South and Central America in those early DC United teams, like Barra Brava was predominantly like Spanish speaking, and you had a lot of Latinos coming out to support DC United and tailgate and grill, and there was a more authentic atmosphere, I think, that was reflected in it. And so you had this intensity of experience, even if it wasn't the largest crowd. There was still a singing, chanting, drums throughout the whole game that never felt inauthentic to me. Not that it feels inauthentic now, but definitely just had a different vibe back then. And then my experiences of global soccer are much more limited than Graham's. But I would say in Turkey, the old Galatasaray Stadium, Ali Sami Yen Stadium, it speaks to a lot of what, Graham, you were talking about. Of like, it was in Mecidiyeköy in Şişli, which is in like the central part of the city in the European side of Istanbul. And it was, on top of that, I think it only sat 25,000, although they probably fit in like 35,000 for most games. But it was, as a result, really low. It was a really like low-slung, kind of poured concrete stadium. And so it gave you this feeling of like, not only are you in the heart of the city, but it's not this looming giant that you can see from blocks and blocks away. It was one where you're just like, oh, now I'm in the stadium. And because of that, it felt like this organic thing that was pulsing and breathing, and it was just a nuts atmosphere from start to finish in that one. From like 30 minutes before the game till 30 minutes after, it was raucous and intense the entire time. And a lot of Turkish stadiums were like that. Fenerbahce Stadium on the Asian side was definitely like that. So was Beşiktaş's old stadium. I'm assuming their new stadium is the same, and Turk Telekom the same for their intensity of volume. But as I said, not the loudest place I've ever been. Graham, do you have any thoughts on Turkish football culture?
I was just going to ask you, is Galatasaray's old stadium the one where they made the away team come up from underground?
Yep.
So that that's nuts.
That's the Welcome to Hell stadium. Yes, sir, it is. And you are just suddenly surrounded by flares and intense chanting. And I've talked about this before, but also because of like the way like they celebrate with goal. And so even a goal scored, instead of being like, yeah, and the pitch goes up, goal and the pitch goes down, it's a much more intense experience. Even when everybody's happy, it still sounds louder and scarier. But the loudest place I've ever been for a soccer match was Eintracht Frankfurt when they were beating Bayern Munich, I think 5-1 when we were over there. And they have open air press seats, so you're like amongst the supporters. You're out there. But I was sitting, I think, next to Sam Thai, and I had to genuinely scream for him to be able to hear anything I was saying. It was so loud for that whole game. I've never experienced anything like it, where though you're there as a member of the press, though I didn't chant or sing anything, when we left, I could not talk because you had to scream so loud to just be audible to people sitting around you. That was pretty intense.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Bundesliga clubs have pretty intense atmospheres. I have been to countless stadiums in Germany and watched countless games, have not watched the Bundesliga game. It's all been international soccer. So I've been to that stadium. I was at Frankfurt, Taylor, first of all.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been to that stadium.
Deutsche Bank.
I was there last summer, but I haven't watched the Bundesliga game in my life, so that's on the bucket list.
You gotta change that, man. Even Dusseldorf, I think we saw them. It was a derby, to be fair, versus Köln, and that was even crazy loud as well, even in a smaller stadium with less to play for. And they certainly weren't beating Bayern Munich on that one. But yeah, it's a good time. We should go to Germany. Let's make it happen. But atmosphere, so much fun. Go ahead, Graham.
No, I was just going to say we should do it. We should go to Germany. I mean, I was trying to think of individual games. I mentioned the Bosnia-USA game, which that was a sellout, by the way, in this huge stadium in Sarajevo, and it was pretty incredible. But I've been to maybe 3, possibly 4 Old Firm games, and in particular the ones at Hampden where it's 50-50, and I've sat, the press seats at Hampden sit in the middle of those two ends of the stadium, and so you literally would have on one side Celtic fans screaming abuse and chanting stuff at Rangers fans who are on the other side of you, so they're shouting and chanting and singing over the top of you while looking at each other. So I'm not sure if that is terribly enjoyable to be in that position, frankly, as a Scot who's grown up in that culture. But yeah, that's pretty nuts and pretty loud.
So whether it's 40,000 people doing a polite golf clap at a moment that everybody appreciated, or it's a particularly rousing song, or even with national teams, you'll get sort of not quite national anthems, but like Fields of Athenry for Ireland would be one. Will Griggs on Fire for Northern Ireland. When you get songs that register with the entire fan base, be it club or country, it can be really, really, really stirring and pull everybody together in that way. If it's organized chants, if it's drums, if it's flares, if it's tifos, what have you. There are many, many different ways in which an atmosphere can be created. some of which can be inauthentic and bad, the majority of which are terrific and make soccer that much more fun to watch. And I think that is the thing that differentiates between soccer and most other sports, is you're getting like a lot of music cues in American sports as to when to cheer and when you're supposed to put on your rally caps and da-da-da-da-da, charge and defense and all that stuff. And that can be fun unto itself, but it doesn't hold a candle to, I don't know, La Bombonera for sure.
Yeah, just to finish, can I give you an example? One of the weirder examples of when I was talking about like cultural exchange of fans doing one thing because they played in a... This is one of the weirder ones, and for a long time I had no idea why Scotland fans did this. But at every Scotland match, at least once, you will hear Do a Dear from The Sound of Music sung in full by 50,000 Scotland fans. And I was like, why do we sing Do a Dear, like the whole song? It's because apparently in the 80s Scotland played Austria in Vienna and we had a particularly good result, and they were playing, apparently before the game, they were playing music from the Sound of Music for, I guess, just Austrian. And so Scotland fans adopted this and now sing Do a Dear at basically every match that Scotland plays. So I love that. It's weird, and like it's still, every time it happens, I'm like, this is still surreal. Like decades on, that all of Hampden is singing The Sound of Music. But it happens.
How do you think it happened the first time? Like after initially hearing Austria, like we're like, remember that time? That was fun, right? Should we play that? Yeah, we should play that. Like I don't know what makes those things occur, but again, you feel like there is an organic experience to it that makes it resonate.
Yeah, and also it's funny because like, you're not singing it in the same way that it's sung in The Sound of Music. It's much more aggressive from Scotland fans. It's like, do a dear, a farewell dear,
it sounds rabid.
A drop of golden sun. Yeah, so it's a different sort of vibe.
Oh, that rules. Yay, atmosphere. Yay, Graham. Yay, Scotland. Graham Ruthven, thank you once again for spending some time to talk about atmosphere today on this lovely episode.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell.
Listeners, thank you all so much as well. We greatly appreciate your support and your listenership, and we'll talk to you again next week.